let's start with something easy. We'll say, what was your neighborhood like when you were growing up?
The one in Colorado?
Yeah, the
Pueblo.
first one, yeah.
On Chester Avenue, 109 North Chester. And it was mainly, the area was mainly Italian in that particular neighborhood. Already I'm doing this, goodness. And I lived there until I was 12 years old. Let's see here. Going to school, this is back in Pueblo now. My school was about a mile away, and I had to walk it. There was no bus services like we have today. And I remember one morning in particular it had rained, swoosh, scratch that. It had snowed heavily, and I remember to go to school. I was standing on front of the porch there, and Joe Bud takes off, and he goes to school, and he leaves me standing there, and I'm crying for him to come back to get me. And needless to say, he didn't. And in those days, you did not stay home because of the snow or the weather, because they would always call you a sugar baby. So you tried to avoid that. And as I say, I had about a mile to walk to Hinsdale school. And that was that. In that neighborhood, I remember, I'm not supposed to roller skate because at the age of 4, I had rheumatic fever, which affected my heart. And Mama and Nana, my grandmother, they were very strict. I couldn't take swimming lessons or anything like that. They had them at school. But anyway, I would sneak off on my skates and skate all the way past Hinsdale and back, which was a good 1.5 miles more distance. And so asked me questions. We lived on Chester Avenue until 1941 when Mama, Sylvia, Joe Bud, and I moved to California. John Bud was already in the service.
Uh-huh.
So
Mike had some neighborhoods that he said you might know. Goat Hill and Smelter.
Goat Hill was up the hill, and it was a hill. And I don't know, I guess at one time there were a lot of goats in the area, but I never saw any goats on Goat Hill. And Smelter was right below after that. And so.
Okay. And he wanted to know if it was like a rough, was your neighborhood, was it nice? It was very nice, it wasn't a rough area?
We had no problems there.
Yeah.
No problems. I think, we would have occasionally, we'd have what you would call a hobo would come to the door, and my mother always made up a nice sandwich for them and had them go away with the sandwich. But otherwise, we had no neighborhood problems.
Okay. He also had some people, he gave me a list of like people you might know. One of them was Culadro Buccino. Does that name ring a bell?
Buccinos, I think they lived on First Street, and supposedly they were cousins of ours, Buccinos.
Okay. And then he also had Blackie Fasulo was another person you might know.
Blackie Yes, he lived up on Goat Hill next to Uncle Fred and Aunt Mary's house. Yeah, and he was constantly in trouble. But they called him Blackie because he was so dark.
Really?
Uh-huh.
And Mike said something about he like lost his legs or that might have been somebody else, but he mentioned to me that guy had like been shot in his legs.
the person I'm thinking of is not Blackie, it's Janettes, or Gerantine, anyway. Yes, he walked with a limp and he was shot. I think he was dealing in because at that time there was prohibition, and he was dealing in liquor, and I think he was shot.
Were there some people in the town that did that for a living at the time? It was like...
I imagine they did. I was just a kid, and it was just what I would hear or see.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
And then another person that Mike had questions about was your Uncle Tony.
Bless his soul.
He said that...
Beautiful man.
Yeah.
Beautiful man. As a matter of fact... that's whom Tony was named after, Joe's son.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was named after Uncle Tony, and he died too young. He was like 52.
Okay.
So.
And he lived in Pueblo with you up until he moved to Texas, right?
Oh, well, no, as long as I remember, he always lived in Texas. He went to college in Texas and just stayed and then established his
He stayed there after
business,
college, yeah. And why did you guys move from Pueblo to here?
We moved to California. It was inevitable that we had to move eventually. It was for my mother's health, because in Colorado, especially in the wintertime, she was fine. In the summertime, she was allergic to the alfalfa and then the wild weeds.
Yeah.
And when it would rain, she was really, really dying.
And then...
why am I being recorded and you're on the sideline?
Well, because it's about you. It's not about me. They don't care what I have to say.
Oh, yes, they do.
What is your earliest memory from back then?
I hate to tell you this. I was about 5 years old, playing in the backyard, all by myself, and looking up at the sky. It was nice and blue. But that's the first migraine headache I remember.
Really? That's your first memory?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because the migraine, always, you had the fuzziness in front of you, and, it's horrible.
And you've had those forever since?
Oh, forever.
About how often do you think?
It's been pretty good right now. I keep a log, and I can look to see when I had the last one, but you know who else has them, and I feel so sorry for her, is Allison.
Oh, really?
She has the migraines, and
And so, since you were 5, wow. That's not a happy memory. I was thinking it would be something a little happier than that.
Well, I had a happy memory at the age of 11. I had a birthday party, and I remember we were in the dining room, and I had my friends around me and everything. And I remember one present that I got, and I opened it and got it, and they were panties, little girls' panties. And Uncle Fur was standing there, and he grabbed one, and he's waving and everything, and I was so mad at him. But that was it. I was about 11 at that time.
And when you were a kid, did you and your parents get along pretty well? You didn't fight with them? You weren't a troublemaker?
No.
Did you ever get into trouble as a kid?
No, I cried a lot.
You cried?
I cried because one time I wanted some boots, and we couldn't afford boots. We'd walk barefooted in the snow before we would have boots. But anyway, I remember I sat in the stairwell there, and I'm crying because I wanted boots. I also wanted a Girl Scout outfit, but I knew better than to ask for that.
Yeah. And where did you and your friends hang out when you were a kid? What was your like spot that you'd go to?
Well, down the street there was towards the riverbed, and there was a empty lot there, and we would play baseball down there. My parents never knew that because I wasn't supposed to play baseball.
Why not? Oh, because of the heart
rheumatic
thing,
fever.
yeah. Who was the oldest person that you knew as a kid that you can remember?
The oldest. Well, probably my grandmother. Yeah.
And how old was she? She was...
Well, I didn't keep track, but she lived with us on Chester Avenue in Pueblo, and then when we moved, she moved up with her daughter Mary and Uncle Fred up on Goat Hill, and so she lived with them. And she was fine until she fell one time, and I don't know what she did with her hip, if it was broken or what, and they didn't take her to the doctor. And I remember she was in bed, because in 1943 or 44, from California, I went to Pueblo for the summer, and I remember she was bedridden from that fall.
Yeah.
So she was about in her 80s.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, when you were an early teenager.
Mm-hmm. And I remember I was wearing a skirt, a navy blue skirt and a white blouse, and in bed, and she looked at me and she thought the skirt was black, and I wasn't supposed to wear black because that signifies a death from the family. And I said, no, Nana, it's navy blue. You know.
Did much of the family speak Italian when you were growing up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, excuse me, when my mother passed away, because she spoke Italian in the house, out she spoke English, but when she passed away, and I told my dad, I said, now we're going to speak Italian, right? He says, yes. So he'd start off in Italian and then go into English. And I said, Dad, that's not what we're supposed to do. So that was the end of that.
And so did you pick up any of it, or did you mostly just only knew English?
I spoke Italian pretty well, although it was a southern dialect.
Yeah.
When I took my first trip to Italy, I had to be careful to stay away from the southern accent. And I did that so well that one time when I was in northern Italy and I was speaking Italian, and he thought I was from Naples, so I had the Neapolitan accent.
Why did you have to stay away from the southern accent?
In Italy, the northerners are and they look down on the southerners.
Yeah. Do you still remember any of it now, or is it?
Oh, that trip was very vivid in my mind.
Yeah. And
that was in 1959.
Okay. And can you still speak Italian now if you
I've
needed to? It's gone.
I've lost it all, which is unfortunate. You have to keep it up. And that's why your mother is doing very well.
Yeah, she's practicing, trying to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you took that trip. That was your first time going to Italy, was 1959?
Mm-hmm.
And how many times have you been?
I've been to Italy a couple more times, but in Sicily, that was the only time I went down there. Because I had Zio Rosario, Salvatore, Paolo. Those were my mother's brothers. They were still living at the time. And her sister, Crucifissa, and some nieces. As a matter of fact, I had some nieces who had bright red hair and blue eyes in Sicily.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so you knew the family in Italy pretty well at the time.
Mama used to talk about them all the time. She used to correspond with her sister. And when I graduated high school, my mother sent a picture of me. And there's a picture in the hallway there with my cap. And she sent it to her sister. And her sister had suggested that we match up with her son Luigi. Well, my mother was just insulted. That was first cousin.
But they were trying to get you guys to date.
and I guess in Sicily they did that because of the population, the scarcity of the people there. But, so Mama was very, very displeased with that.
And so did you meet up with them when you were over there?
I met up with her sister and her brothers and some cousins. And then also on that trip to Sicily, before I went to Sicily, I spent some time up in in Florence and with some cousins there. And I remember Caterina was trying to talk me out of going down. She says, you don't want to go down to Sicily. There's nothing down there, blah, 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 blah. And I says, if I don't go to Sicily, I may as well not even go home. Because my mother was fully expecting me to go down there.
Do you have any stories from going down there from any of those people?
Yes. Yeah. When, okay, from Rome I took a flight down to Palermo and spent some time, I overnight in Palermo in one of the newer hotels, and it was very, very nice, and I made a reservation there for when I was going to come back. And so from that day, when I got up, and I had a couple of hours to wait for the bus to take me down. Here's Palermo up at the top by the Mediterranean, and the winding road down to Agrigento. And so I finally got on that bus. The funny thing about that ride was looking out the window. We made a stop at Busacchino, I think it was, or whatever it was. And I looked out, and there was this woman who was supposed to get on the bus, and she was arguing with somebody else standing there, and then this fellow on the bus got down out there. It was my aunt Crucifissa.
Really?
And my uncle Salvatore. And so finally, I'm looking out, and I thought, oh, and I reckon from pictures that Mama had. Anyway, and it's so funny. This is the difference between there and here. And people, they didn't mind. They just sat back and they enjoyed the show. Where here, people would become, come on, let's go, la, la, la. Anyway, so then they finally settled their argument out there, and Crucifissa got on the bus with Salvatore, and we proceeded on down to Buscatino. And the funny thing is that I had been riding on the bus with Zio Salvatore all the way from Palermo, and I didn't know he was on the bus. He was up in front, and I was way in back. Anyway.
And so did you talk to them? And
finally,
yeah. And do you remember much about them? What were they like?
A typical Italian, and Italians.
Yeah. say, did you stay with them and when you
Well,
were
I
there?
stayed with Zio do Savio.
Yeah.
Once we reached our destination there, and I remember I was up on the second floor. He had this beautiful house that he built, and I remember going out on the patio and looking out and having my breakfast, my espresso and all of that. And it was very, very nice. Anyway, as the morning progressed, then my aunt was taking me around to visit the neighbors. Well, of course, they all say, "Oh, Americana." They were expecting me, and so anyway, we that was our tour that day. And so that was that. And then I was there for about 3 days, and then Zio Rosario wanted me to stay longer to go a Campagna, where the fellows were going to go, where he had olive groves, and they slept out in the open and all of that, which I would have liked to have done, but I had to, get back because I had a reservation on the plane to get back to Rome, and then the next day to fly home. So it was a schedule problem.
That's a fun trip. Do you have any other real memorable trips that you've taken, places you've gone?
Oh gosh. Well, I've taken many trips.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Greece very much in 1974. Was on a Mediterranean cruise, and then we stopped at some, the name is on the tip of my tongue, the island, where then we took Santarino, and we took the trip up to the top, and then coming down, I remember being on the donkey. There's a picture somewhere of me on the donkey going down to Santarino to the bottom. So that was in Greece, but that was on the Mediterranean cruise. And I was disappointed I didn't get to go to, because it was sort of windy, and they didn't want, the ship couldn't get close enough to the coastline for us to get on the smaller boat to go into town. What's the name? Memory is slipping, Dominic. The most famous island down there that I was looking forward to and couldn't do it. But that's not the only disappointment in my life, so just pile it on.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And then, so back here, you moved to LA when you were 12?
12 in 1941, and September the 8th, 1941. And John Budd was already in the service, and he was going to complete his year at Christmas and come home. And but anyway, on that trip, September 41, it was Mama, Joe Budd, Sylvia, and me. And then Daddy was supposed to follow over. However, in the meantime, Pearl Harbor happened, and Daddy demurred and didn't come for almost a year later, because he didn't know if he was going to pull us out of California back to Colorado. He did, because we were on the coastline. He didn't know if we should go back home. But anyway, we didn't do that, and eventually he came out and met us.
What was it like living during the war? What changed for you?
Well, my first job at 14, I told you that, was waitressing at Woolworth's soda fountain counter, and that, and then eventually Dad came out and met us. He came out, he drove his Nash automobile. And some in the family would be familiar with the name Mike Galasso. He and Daddy drove out together. Well, the reason to remember Mike Galasso, you could put a platter of spaghetti about that size, and he would consume it. And anyway, so next.
And so, did he lived with you, or he just came out and?
Oh no, he did not live with us. No, he came out. He already had somebody living out here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he came out with my dad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so your brothers then go off to the war. And
Johnny was already in the war, and he was expected to finish and come home for Christmas. And December 7th, and I remember the headlines in the paper, and because I was at a friend's house on East Lake Avenue where her father had the paper, and I saw it, and I thought, oh no, I knew immediately it meant Johnny wasn't coming home right away. And on the way was Aunt Lucy's house, and I stopped there, and I'm telling her about it, and she was dispelling the whole thing as if I didn't know what I was talking about. And anyway, so then I finally got home and told my family, and that was that. And then that was December, of course, and some friends of ours were going to go to Pueblo for Christmas time in December of 41, and I wanted to go with them because I was going to be able to see John Budd. He was stationed in Texas, but he was getting a furlough, and he was going to be in Pueblo, and I wanted to go. And the reason he went to Pueblo was because of Grandma. You know, Grandma helped raise John Budd, and Grandma and Aunt Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones who took him out of the orphanage and brought him home. But anyway, so we were talking about December the 7th.
Yeah, he was going on his furlough to Pueblo. And so he ended up being gone for how long?
5 years.
5 years.
Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I have a letter. One day when you have nothing else to do, if you want to read those letters. But they're not leaving this house. They're staying right here. But what was I telling you about the letters? Well, anyway, we'll skip that.
Yeah, so he's gone 5 years, and then when did...
Oh, John Budd was gone 5 years. Oh, what I was going to say, in one of the letters from Joe Budd, he wrote, and he said, now what about John Budd? He should be coming home because he should have enough points where he should be discharged. They counted points for each invasion, each this and each that. And sure enough, the day John Budd came home, I see it so livid in my mind. I was out on the front porch. We were living on Darwin Avenue. And there was a truck peddler across the street with fresh vegetables. And Mama wanted him to come on over. And she said for me to signal him over. So I'm standing on the porch and I'm trying to get his attention. In the meantime, down the street, walking towards me, is this soldier. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'll bet he thinks I'm flirting with him. Anyway, by the time he gets about 50 feet from me, I recognize that walk of his. And I said, John.
And what about Joe? What did
Oh, Joe Bud.
Yeah.
Now you have to remember there's about a 9-year difference between John Bud and Joe Bud.
Yeah.
John Bud, how shall I put this? Well, it's part of family history. He had been in an orphanage.
Mm-hmm.
And when my grandmother, Nana, and Aunt Mary and Dad heard about this, that his mother had abandoned him, they went to the orphanage to get him. And it was a big, well, in those days that was scandalous. And it made the papers and everything, the divorce and all of that. But anyway, so Aunt Mary and Grandma, Nana, got, and I guess Dad was with them, got John out of the orphanage, and they brought him at home, and they raised him. And John was then 9 years old when my mother and father married.
So John was from...
John was from another woman. Her name was Claire. She was a ballet dancer, or anyway, she was in the theater.
A previous woman with your father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And she was, and as I say, that divorce, from what I understand, made headlines in Pueblo at that time. And so Dad and Aunt Mary and Nana went and got John out, and they raised him. And then when Mama married Daddy, John was 9 years old. And I remember, because I was very close to John. I really idolized him, looked up to him and all of that. And I remember when I was told this story, I didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
Because I said, no, he's my brother. And anyway, so, that was part of growing up.
And then so after that, Joe comes around.
And Joe, and yes, and we were all very, very close. Sylvia later on, but one of the funny things that I used to do, because I had to get back, revenge, I had to get back to my brothers, because at the dinner table, we always had, after dinner, celery. And I guess that helps to digest, or whatever the Italians think. And the celery had just been washed on. And John or Joe would take, and they'd do this to me, and there was no way I could get back at them. So we lived in this 2-story house in Pueblo, and I'd stand up at the top of the stairway, and I'd look down, and when I'd see John or Joe, it was mostly John, I think, and I had this glass of water ready, and when I'd see them, I'd dump it onto them. I didn't get reprimanded for it as far as I can remember.
Yeah. Were your parents pretty strict, or were they
were
easy
strict,
with you?
but they never punished us by spanking us or anything. I remember Sylvia, see, Uncle Fred, Aunt Mary, and the family lived with us on Chester Avenue. We rearranged it so we got along okay. But I remember that there was a point I wanted to make. I got away from it.
We were talking about your parents being strict, but not...
yes. I never was spanked.
Yeah.
Neither was Sylvia. and Joe Bud and all of that. No, we never, we knew our boundaries and we stayed within them. So they never really had to. But I remember Uncle Fred and Aunt Mary, and they were living with us on Chester Avenue. And I remember Uncle Fred, when he would say, was it Sylvia crying or Dominic crying? And I remember Uncle Fred would take his belt off because he was going to spank his son. And I'd sit there and I was a big teaser. And I'd say, your pants are going to fall down. Your pants are going to fall down.
That's funny.
Another time, this is before he married Aunt Mary. He lived across the street from us. And I remember I was crying. I was on the front porch. And I was crying. And he from across the street, he'd say, he'd call me crybaby or something like that. And I said, shut up, you big dumbbell. He didn't dare touch me though. So yeah.
And so was it fun living as like a big family unit like that with?
Remember now, this was Depression days.
Yeah.
You know, you had to do what you had to do.
Uh-huh.
And there was no problem. We had we had room. Grandma lived in one room, and Uncle Fred and Aunt Mary, when they got married, lived in one room. And I remember they were delivered a brand new bedroom set in the room. So that night, the door was closed. And I'm knocking on the door. I wanted to see the bedroom, the new bedroom. They ignored me. And, and now, in Pueblo, the house on Chester, the second floor was the bedroom, Mom and Daddy, and Nana on the side here, and this Uncle Fred and Aunt Mary, and then the bathroom was here. And then off of this room, where Aunt Mary and Uncle Fred lived, was a doorway to an annex that stuck out, and it was screened, but in the winter time it was boarded because it was so cold. And that's where John Bud and Joe Bud slept. No heat, nothing.
Yeah.
And they slept there.
So how many people total were in the house?
Well, let me count. Now, Mom and Daddy. Well, John Bud is away most of the time. Joe Bud, Sylvia, and I, Nana, Aunt Mary, Uncle Fred, and then Aunt Mary had Don and had Joe. But then they were expecting another one, so they moved out and they moved to Goat Hill.
So there was like 10 of you
Yeah,
in the house at one time, yeah. And so, this was Depression era, but you were like a baby during the Depression, right?
It affected because it made me learn values.
Yeah.
I knew that I couldn't, well, like I knew I couldn't ask for a Girl Scout uniform. That was out of the question. I asked for boots, but I couldn't get them. And because walk to school with your shoes, and you had long stockings, and that's what,
Yeah.
You did this.
And would you say, compared to the people around you, you guys were middle class?
We were a
poorer
little
than
bit
average?
above them.
Little bit above
Because I
average.
remember we would have fresh bananas.
Yeah.
And they never did, things like that. And Dad provided for us very, very well.
And that was through barbershop?
Barbershop.
And did he do anything on the side to supplement, or was it was just barbershop?
Well, he had the barbershop on, there's a picture there. And then next door was this restaurant. And they were upstairs. Now, I don't know if he got any revenue from upstairs or not. I really don't know. All I know that I used to go there to sell my Girl Scout cookies, and that they were all very nice, and and I got a lot of orders there, and so.
But you don't know any details of really what was going on upstairs?
No, I didn't, but somebody said, Joe Budd mentioned that it was a brothel upstairs. But I never knew. Everybody was nice to me when I was selling cookies. You know?
Yeah. And so if he was making money through that, he kind of kept it. He kept it on the slide.
I guess.
Yeah.
And well, we had a farm out in the farm, out there, and we didn't run it. We weren't farmers, but we leased it out. So.
Okay, so you were doing okay.
Oh yeah. I would say in the neighborhood we were probably the better off family than the others. Because, well, Dad, as a young kid, he was, 9 years old when he came over? And as a little kid, you went to work. And he, at that time, the only place for employment was the steel mill. And he worked there, and he realized that was not for him. So he got a nice, clean cut job.
Yeah.
Passed the state exam, and he became a barber. And I remember my father always looked so dapper and so neat. He'd come home from for lunch in his navy blue suit and hat. There's a picture of him on the wall with this hat. And, you know.
I've got a couple more from Mike here. He sent me a picture here of your mom's citizenship request form. Do you remember anything about this? About the day when she got her citizenship? Is that?
I have something on the wall, but this isn't it. I'd surely like a copy of this.
I'll get it for you from Mike.
Yeah,
he sent me that. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Because mine isn't that.
Do you remember when that happened? Was it a big celebration?
We didn't have a big celebration, but I remember at night, Daddy was still working. He kept the barbershop open until 9 o'clock every night. But anyway, I remember she would be in bed, ready to go to sleep, and I'd be sitting on the edge of the bed, and I would quiz her on the questions that she would be asked for citizenship.
Yeah.
And I remember the one I remember the most, what are the 3 branches, you know, so she said, and anyway, she passed the exam, and there's a picture of her on the wall, and there's no notation on it, but it's when she got her citizenship, and a picture of her on the wall, you know. And
so she came over.
She came over in 1921. Mm-hmm. She was 21 years old, and she had a very rough trip over the Atlantic. It was, I guess most of the trip she was sick, and that was horrible. And they disembarked in Boston, and then she took the train from Boston to Pueblo. So on the train, there was one conductor there who was Italian, and so they got to talking, and he told her that in Pueblo that there was this big flood that wiped off everything. That was June the 3rd, 1921. So she was miserable the rest of the way, because he told her the whole city was gone, and her brother was supposed to meet her. and she didn't know what she was going to do. She had nobody she knew, didn't speak English, and whatever. Fortunately, he was okay, and he met her at the station in Denver.
And do you know how your mom and dad met after that?
Yes. Well, my grandmother probably had something to do with it. She was quite a lady. And somehow or another they got my dad and my mother, because my mother was living up in Bessemer with her brother and sister-in-law. That's the Periconis. And Dad would be in main town, part of town, and every Sunday he'd go over there, I guess take public transportation, whatever was there, and he'd sit at one end of the room, she'd be at the other end of the room. That was the form of their courtship. And anyway, so.
That's funny. And so, what was dating for you like at the time when you were, I guess, early teens in Pueblo, and then you came to LA? Did you?
Not in Pueblo. I was only.
You would have
12.
been only 12. But once you came here, were you out on the town dating much? No.
No, I was a young teenager going to high school, and then I went to City College for 2 years, and I had a job, and I liked that very much, and I wish I hadn't cut out the college part, but I did. And I dated this one fellow. His name was Ron Ferrara. Met him in my Italian class, and we dated a couple of times. And I was very particular,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Yeah.
You know.
So you weren't out on the town a whole lot, dating a bunch.
Mm-mm.
More career focused.
Well, I had a number of boyfriends,
Mm-hmm.
if that's what you mean. In 46 at a church, Christ the King, we had a young people's club, and it was a nice kid. We actually didn't go out on dates. He would come over, and I was so mad at him. He'd come over on Sunday after, he'd go to church, and he knew I was at 11 o'clock Mass, and he'd meet me, and then he'd come home with me and enjoy a nice spaghetti dinner.
We had it all figured out.
Yeah. Oh, dear. But anyway, so that came and went, and then in college I went with this, I had 2 dates with him, and so, yeah. And through church, I knew a couple of fellows, but you can't say that they were like regular boyfriends or whatever. There's one real nice fellow. His name was Ted Murphy, and I felt so sorry for him. It was a big Irish family, and they were being raised by their Aunt Margaret. And I think they had lost their parents in an automobile accident. They had owned the Portland Land Cement Company and all of that. But, yeah, there was a big Murphy family, children. So.
And so you never end up getting married, right? You're
Right.
single forever. Were you ever in love with any of?
Not really.
Not in love ever?
Nothing really shook me up or anything.
Yeah. So nobody was just...
I think I was just, I don't know the proper word. It'll come to me when I'm not thinking what kind of word I want to use.
Yes, but just nobody was right. You didn't find the right guy.
Nobody really
Yeah.
swept me off my feet.
Uh-huh. That's good. I mean, it's good to be particular, right? You think that was the right, you're happy with how it went? Yeah.
You know, it gave me a wide sense of liberty or freedom or whatever. A lot of things I did that I wouldn't have been able to do.
Mm-hmm.
One was when Donna passed away, Joe's wife. I stepped in, sort of helped there, and I was always available there. Where I think if I were tied down with a particular person, I wouldn't have had that loose freedom. And I never regret anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Here's another one from Mike, and he says, are there any traits in current family members that remind you of people that are long gone? Maybe they laugh the same way, or things like that, where you look at people now around you and they remind you of people from years and years ago. No, not really?
You can't say that, no.
Yeah. Another thing he wanted to know about your dad's political beliefs. And how they were formed by his life experience.
That's where I got my conservatism.
From your dad, yeah.
My dad. He, a very wise man. He was 50 years ahead of his time. A staunch Republican all the way through. And he was right all the way through.
And Mike said that he might have perspective on Roosevelt being overrated, and he wasn't a Roosevelt fan.
He wasn't a Roosevelt fan, and one thing sticks out in my mind. I remember him saying during the war, when Joe Bud got called, and he told my mother, I guess to sort of placate her, he said that Roosevelt had said that soldiers here in America would be one whole year in training before being shipped across to far off places. And Daddy said, and maybe in a year the war should be over and Joe wouldn't go overseas. John Budd was already.
Yeah, he'd been long gone.
He had already been in the invasion of Sicily and fought up to Anzio, was wounded, sent to the medical ship, then sent back to the front line and whatever. So, but the day Joe Bud went into the Army, I remember that day. I stayed home from school, and I was with my mother, and we were with these other women at, what was her name, on Gates Avenue at their house. That same day, 5 young boys from our neighborhood went into the Army, and I can give you their name. Vincy, Belletti, John Rossi, Joe Budd, and come on, one more. There were 5 of them. And that day, the mothers sat around there, and there they are, crying away.
Yeah. A hard day for everybody.
I remember the war was still on when John Budd came home from overseas. He was still in the Army, though. And I remember him, he was stationed in Sausalito, Illinois, and I never knew when he was coming home. And he'd always surprise us when I come home from school. I'm looking to see if he's going to surprise me. Anyway, he was one day on a weekend leave, and I remember we were on the streetcar. We were going to go to a movie, and there we are. And I remember these 2 women across me, and they're looking at us, and they're thinking that here's this older man with this young girl, and I think they were thinking of us as
a couple, yeah.
Girlfriend, yeah, instead it was brother, sister.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another thing from Mike. He wondered if there's any stories that your grandparents or anybody older in your life when you were a kid told you that has stuck with you and was kind of burned into your mind.
There were many, many stories my mother told me about Sicily, and so when I went to Sicily to visit it, I felt I had already been there because she described everything so perfectly, and it was so strange. As far as Grandma, I can't remember anything specific. I know they landed in New Orleans, and they were down there, and then eventually, and they had I think it was sugar cane or cotton plantation, and apparently they lost everything, and then they moved up to Pueblo.
Did they ever talk to you about why they left Italy?
Oh, my father did. I remember one time after one of my European trips, and I came and I said, Dad, you should go back to Italy and visit. Whew. Why should I go back there? I left that misery, all that misery behind me.
Yeah. What did he not like about it? What was...
Well, he had lived here long enough to know the nice facilities, the modern things, where over there, at least in his area, they didn't have.
Yeah, maybe more rural and, yeah. What do you think from, like, back then till now, what has changed the most just in the world for you? What's...
In the world, I think people are not as respectful of others as they used to be. I think it's all me. But I'm not the one to say. I don't know.
What about your career? What started your career? How did you choose it?
Oh gosh. Well, I ended up with the CPA firm with Joe Buck.
Yeah.
And that was not planned. And I had, I was taking some courses at City College, and I was taking accounting, but that is not what led me to this. Let's see, how did it happen? Anyway, Joe Budd was working with this firm, Mr. Mueller and Eccles, and they were working on a big project, a big audit, and they needed another typist. And so I went in and became very proficient as a statistical typist, and that's not easy because that can slow you down when you have to look at the keys. You have to do it by feel. And then I just liked it and just stayed on. I know I wanted to go back to school, and I talked to Joe Budd, and I said, I think I'll go to night classes and see if I can eventually pass, maybe take the CPA exam. He said, oh, why do all of that? You're comfortable here and that. And so I did.
And so you liked your career? You enjoyed it?
It was, when you're in business for yourself, you extend yourself more. Because I remember one time, this was the firm Mueller and Eccles, and Eccles was complaining that 5 o'clock his employees are out, and there he is stuck in the office. But that's, that's the way it is if it's your own business.
And so you did that for many years, right?
Over 50 years.
Over 50 years.
55.
And you worked there with your brother for most of that time.
Yeah, we were a good team. Joe Bud and I were a good team in the sense that, number one, we socialized together and it was great. Number two, after Donna died, I stepped in and helped. Number three, career-wise, we were a good team together. So.
Yeah, and how old were you when Donna died? You were.
Well, we were both. She was a year older than I, and I think she was like 47 or in that area.
And so that involved you were over there cooking dinners, taking care of the kids.
I remember one time being over there. You don't know the house, so the dining room stood out, and when you look out, there was a swimming pool, and Joey was about 8 years old, and he sensed that his mother was going to die soon. He didn't say anything to him. He just felt it. And so one day he says, he was 8, Auntie Vita, when Mama dies, are you going to live here with us? Because I used to stay up there when Joe was out of town.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, honey, where am I going to stay? I said, all the rooms are taken and everything. Well, we can build a house over this way. And I said, well, my gosh, that's extending it over the swimming pool.
And so where were you living at that time? It was
on Oxford.
On Oxford.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have another one here. What would you say you're most proud of in your life?
Oh, that's difficult.
I know, that's a hard one.
That's
very open-ended.
No, I can't answer that.
Okay.
I'm no judge of myself.
You don't have any
What?
anything that specifically stands out? Any accomplishments or anything?
No.
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 What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned in your life?
Biggest lesson?
Yes.
Never thought of that. Maybe to be a bit more patient of people, to tolerate them better. Don't jump to conclusion right away, which I find sometimes I still am doing that, and it isn't a good thing. But that's about it.
You've been religious, very religious for your whole life, right?
Well, let's say I have a religion that I cling to, a faith that I rely upon, maybe sometimes too much, but it's there to comfort me.
Mm-hmm. And has that been since you were a kid, or did that develop at some point?
I don't know. I remember in Colorado as a kid having to go to Mass at Mount Carmel over the other end of town. And I remember, and then in the afternoon would be catechism class. And I remember Father William, he was so strict. Did you come to Mass today? One of those things. So But I have to say, I grew closer to church after. I didn't let that hang over me, except here at Christ the King, and I was very disappointed in Monsignor Corcoran when Don and Joe Gatto, they lived on Oxford near us, and they go to Christ the King. It was most convenient because you take the bus and it just brought you there without a transfer or anything like that directly. And I remember the boys after Mass were there outside the church and Monsignor Corcoran. And what is your name? And where do you live? And when they said Oxford, he said, well, you don't belong here. You should be at St. Kevin's. And I thought that was very, very out of place and all that. So he was, Monsignor Corcoran was very, very strict. We had another priest by the name Father Conroy, and he was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
He put together a young people's group. Consequently, about half of those people intermarried.
Yeah. And do you meet a lot of friends through church throughout your life? Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's a different circle of friends because they have moved out at that time. At that time, Christ the King was mostly Irish parishioners,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's mostly Filipino. It has taken over.
And when you moved to LA, were you in a mostly Italian area still, or was it more
Yes,
mixed?
On Hancock Avenue. Aunt Lucy lived there, and that was in like sort of East LA before you get to Alhambra.
Yeah, and it was Italian at the time.
Mm-hmm. And we lived on Darwin Avenue, and I used to walk to high school on Thomas all the way straight up.
How is the city of LA different then?
So different.
Yeah.
So different. None of this horrible stuff that goes on right now. Like for instance, I can't help but think of Joe Gatto and the horrible ending he had.
Yeah. So it felt safer back then?
Oh yeah.
Who would you say your best friend has been outside of your family?
Gosh, they're gone.
That's okay. You can still count them.
Well, Vera Eccles was from high school, and then another one, she just passed away last year. Her name was, we called her Libby, and Rogmus, and she had leukemia, or what do you call it, Hodgkin's disease?
Yeah.
And she would go in remission and then hit and then remission and hit, and she just passed away about a year ago at 96.
And where did you meet her? She was
High school.
High school. Wow. So you were friends from high school until now.
And she was the last one. There was another one, what's her name, Perino, Lulu Perino from high school, and she passed away 2 years ago. And little by little, they all left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about Alex? I know he was somebody that you spent a lot of time with.
Spent a lot of time with Alex. I first met him in the dentist chair. And by the way, a very, very good dentist.
Oh yeah.
I go to dentists now, and they see some of the work in my mouth, and they all comment about it. I know he took a lot of pride in his work. So,
And how old were you when you met him?
there was quite a difference in age. There was 16 years difference.
Mm-hmm.
How old was I? What year was it? I can't remember.
Yeah, but you were middle-aged when you met him, or?
I was in my early 40s.
Okay, so early 40s. And he was, would you consider him, he was your boyfriend, or was he just a friend that you liked to hang
More
out
than
with?
a friend.
Yeah.
We'd we do a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
We always, every year we'd go to Mauna Kea, sometimes twice a year, and I didn't object to that.
Yeah.
But, that's where I played the most golf.
Uh-huh.
It was out there than over here.
Have you played a lot of golf throughout your life? Big golf fan. And you've made friends through golf? Do you have anybody?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of them are gone,
Yeah.
including Alex and.
Is that you two would play golf together?
Yeah. Now, Vita, remember, the ocean's over there, the mountains over there. This isn't putting, which way you're put. Remember this and that. No. Yes, Alex.
And were you a good player?
I held my own,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it very much.
Uh-huh.
I remember one year on the 7th hole, I hit my tee shot and it veered to the right. Oh, it went into lava rocks, and you just don't want to go in there because you don't want to get cut on
Yeah.
any of those rocks. And I went over and I just did a real cursory look, and then I gave up. And so that was that on that hole. And it was darn it, I wished I'd kept it. It was not a Jack Nicklaus ball. Oh, I can't remember. I can picture the golfer, not a Lee Trevino. Anyway, and so I gave it up because I couldn't find it. A couple of weeks later, after we got home, why did I throw it away? Anyway, mounted on this wooden mound here was this ball on there. And I thought, oh gosh. So he went through the trouble of doing all of that.
That's sweet. Who do you think in your life has influenced you the most?
My father.
Yeah. How so?
He was so sensible on everything and so patient and so diplomatic, and I wish I could be more of that. Perfect, he was perfect. And my mother in a lot of ways too. My mother was more demonstrative than my father. My father was more settled and more sensible.
Mm-hmm.
My mother just exploded and showed it all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any stories that brings to mind?
I remember when I came back from Italy, how she welcomed me and was so happy to see me and to hear all my stories with her family over there and everything. Mm-hmm.
That's sweet. This one's kind of a tough one, but do you know the best day of your life?
Every day.
Every day. There's no specific one. You just
No.
Everyone is as good as it gets. Well, that was the answer I was expecting. That's a good
What
answer.
were you expecting?
I don't know, but that's a good answer.
Now, is Michael going to hear all of this? This is so personal.
Well, that's the point. It's supposed to be personal so that everybody can learn about your life.
Oh, gee. God.
Let's see. Um, what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you?
I don't know if it'd be in that category of scariest. The war years were very, very stressful.
Yeah.
Even though I was a kid, there were nights that I fell asleep crying. You know, Joe Bud being in the Pacific and bouncing from one island to another, and John Bud coming home, and I remember the day he surprised us when he came home from Europe. And I remember he was sitting on the couch, and I was next to him as close as I could get without being sitting on his lap. And I had my arm around his shoulder, and I could swear every nerve in that body was shaking. Just shaking. He still wasn't settled down.
Mm-hmm.
And the stupidity of some people. You know, this was on Darwin Avenue, Italian people, you know. And the minute they heard John was here, and he had fought in Sicily and all of that, in Italy. And I remember this one man, I could have popped him on the head. He blurted out, "Oh, did you, when you were in Sicily, did you happen to see the Borghese family or whatever family it was?" I don't remember who it was. He was busy there fighting a war, not on a social calendar.
Yeah. Do you think, was the war the most formative part of your life? Do you think, was that the most kind of significant event?
The war was very important in my life. I was young and impressionable.
Yeah.
Very impressionable. So much so that I had in my mind that I was going to train and be a cadet nurse.
Really?
Yeah, so I could go overseas and when I mentioned that to John Budd, he says, "No, you're not."
He knew it was over there. Yeah.
He said, "No, you're not." Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And the whole thing was, I wanted to be a surgical nurse. Now at the sight of blood, I... yeah.
Here's another tough one. We'll see if you can think of anything for this, but it's, what was the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
There's so many.
Well, any that come to mind.
Oh. I can't answer that.
Nothing comes to mind for it?
Well, there's so many, as I say. No.
No? Is there anything that you've always wanted to do but never got around to?
I wanted to do. Isn't that awful?
Well, it's... Anything that, yeah, was like something that you've always kind of thought that you wanted to do? Nothing? You did it all? What about, are there any people that maybe none of us would know about that you think we'd like to know about?
Skip it.
Skip it? That's the end of what I have written down.
Okay.
I think we could get into just some stories, maybe, if you have any stories from your life that you think are interesting. You could retell the story you told to me earlier about your job at the where you were a waitress.
Oh, oh, dear me. At the age of 14.
Yeah.
And that was during the war, so they were eager for help. And so I got the summer job there. And, well, as I told you earlier, that my first job, and I was eager to prove myself and all that. So consequently, the manager she saw I could do it, and she put me at the front, busiest station. And I was doing fine and everything until this one woman who accused me of not giving her the full amount of change. First of all, remember, this is during the war. First of all, we couldn't take anything higher than a dollar bill. We had to turn it in to the manager for the change. Everything was 10 cents and 15 cents, and I think a banana split was 15 cents and whatever. And anyway, so when I was accused of that, I was just humiliated. Remember, I'm 14. And who walks in? My mother. And she sees me crying. And so she goes home. She tells Daddy, well, you better tell Vita that she needs to quit her job. And Dad said, why? Just because the incident? He says, she has to learn. He says, no, I'm not going to tell her. So anyway, I stayed on the job until I had to go back to school.
That's a good one. Do you have, what about, how long did your parents live?
My mother, unfortunately, died at the age of 65. She had reticulum cell sarcoma.
Mm-hmm.
It was very tragic, and it was very painful for her. And that was hard to watch. My dad, bless his spirit, he was 88, I believe. Strong person, very strong. Mentally strong, physically was, but